Hey guys, tonight we drift into a place where the rivers don't just water the earth, they rule it. Picture this. The stars glimmer faintly above a massive, slow-moving river, wide and quiet, like it's listening to its own ancient secrets. The banks are muddy, the reeds tall and whispering, and somewhere between them, your feet find squishy ground that squelches gently with every step. You're in Mesopotamia now, the land between the rivers, and you're about to bed down, where kings once dozed in palaces made not of stone or gold, but reeds. You probably won't survive this, by the way. The heat alone might unmake you. The mosquitoes have ancestral grudges. And the floods, they show up without RSVP and tend to redecorate the entire neighborhood. But tonight, you're lucky your guide is the slow hum of history and not the high priest with a god complex. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the "Please subscribe to my channel" and share your location and local time, only if you genuinely enjoy my content. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off a dusty path and onto the edge of the Euphrates, where reeds thicker than your thigh rise from water the colour of warm tea. There's no paved road, no grand gate, no chiselled stone lion to greet you. Instead, you're welcomed by the smell of mud and fish and the distant plunk of frogs leaping in protest. This isn't just scenery, it's a system. Mesopotamians didn't merely live by the rivers, they obeyed them. The Euphrates and Tigris weren't just water sources, they were architects. The flooding patterns wrote the agricultural schedule, determined where towns could be built, and sometimes erased them overnight. You follow a narrow track that's less path and more suggestion trampled down between tamarisk shrubs and reeds. Occasionally, a water buffalo lumbers past, unconcerned by your presence. Its huge eyes wet and wise. People here learned early to pay attention. The rivers gave, but they also destroyed. So the clever folks built their homes out of what was abundant clay and reeds. The reeds in particular were magic, flexible yet strong hollow, but insulating. They formed the backbone of daily life. You'd tie your roof with reeds, paddle your boat with them, even chew on them for fun, kind of like historical bubblegum minus the mint. You reach a village where children splash in a shallow canal. Their laughter is soft, almost sleepy, like the world they live in moves at half speed. Behind them, walls of woven reed mats shimmer in the sun. These are houses not much taller than you, but warm in winter, cool in summer, and surprisingly private once layered with mud and a bit of clay plaster. Now imagine scaling that up. Add more reed mats, stack them high, line the floors with rushes and bronze braziers, and voila, you've got yourself a palace. Not the kind with marble columns, but one that breathes with the weather, sways slightly in the wind, and smells faintly of grass, even after being lit with sandalwood incense. You duck under a low lintel and enter a shaded chamber where a clay urn gurgles quietly in the corner. The walls, woven from thick bundles of river reeds, glint like the surface of fish scales in the lamplight. They creak sometimes, almost like they're sighing. A scribe sits on the floor, etching a receipt into a clay tablet. Someone apparently forgot to pay for 3 goats and a wheel of cheese. And here comes the first historical nugget. Mesopotamians, particularly in the south, Sumerians, Akkadians, and later Babylonians, built with mud brick and reeds because stone was scarce. It wasn't about being primitive, it was smart, local, and sustainable. The reeds regrew every season. Mud bricks were sun-dried and reusable. Even palaces followed these principles. But historians still argue whether royal reed palaces were truly permanent or rebuilt regularly, like giant birthday tents for each king. Some say they lasted decades. Others think they were rebuilt every few years, like a seasonally recurring architectural fashion show. Either way, kings chose to sleep among reeds, and not just out of necessity. Reeds connected them to Enki, the freshwater god who emerged from the reeds with wisdom to spare. As you tiptoe past a curtain woven from date palm fibers, a breeze catches you off guard, cool, fragrant, and wet. Somewhere nearby, a servant is sprinkling the floor with rosewater, trying to keep the dust and heat down. The king, we learn, is resting. His bed, not gold-plated or carved from cedar, but a raised platform draped with linen and stuffed with, guess what, reed fibers. You feel your eyelids grow heavier, even your breath slows to match the pulse of this ancient place. One more fringe tidbit before you snooze. Archaeologists once found a reed mat under layers of city ruins that was still intact after 4,000 years. That's right, nature's version of a memory foam mattress. So here you are, lying under a roof that whispers in the wind, listening to the slow breath of a river in a palace made of plants. You don't need walls of stone when the gods themselves are made of mud and stories. You wake, if it can be called that, to the soft hiss of wind sifting through reeds. The palace hasn't crumbled in the night. That's always a win. Your back's a bit stiff, but the woven mat beneath you has more give than expected. You sit up slowly, stretching, and the faint rustle of papyrus echoes through the chamber like the sigh of an old librarian. Welcome to another day in the royal heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where power smells faintly of damp grass and someone else's incense burner. You step outside and blink at the sun, already high and dazzling. The king, your host, is busy, probably praying, politicking, or pretending to do both while enjoying cold beer. You wander around the courtyard, which is more of a packed dirt rectangle framed by reed-walled rooms. Nothing fancy, yet it somehow feels regal. A small irrigation ditch cuts across the southern edge, bordered by flowering shrubs and a few lazy ducks. Even in palaces, water is king. The reason you're not stumbling into marble columns or endless frescoes, mud and reeds, aren't just the building blocks, they're the worldview. Sumerian culture was built on impermanence. Everything was cyclical: floods, harvests, rulers. The great ziggurats, yes, those got bricks, those got height. But even they were often faced with reed mats for insulation or ceremonial use. It's as if the Mesopotamians believed the gods would only bless what could bend without breaking. Still, some corners of this reed palace are surprisingly luxurious. You find a chamber where finely carved wood, imported cedar from Lebanon, is inlaid with lapis lazuli. There's a table. Yes, a real table. On it rests a clay-board game, looking oddly like modern checkers. It's the royal game of and your fingers instinctively reach for a game piece carved from shell. Historians still argue whether it was gambling, divination, or both. Either way, Mesopotamian kings had their version of game night. Outside, priests bustle past in robes dyed with expensive blue. Their sandals leave reed-shaped impressions in the sand. You trail behind them like a particularly nosy spirit and enter a long hall draped with animal skins and embroidered textiles. This is where the king hears petitions, or more accurately, where people grovel, and hope today's horoscope didn't say, "Beware of royalty." The throne reed-wrapped, tall, curving, and covered with thick cushions that probably conceal a few generations of royal crumbs. You almost sit down before thinking better of it. Instead, you notice a pair of musicians in the corner tuning instruments. One plucks a lyre shaped like a bull, its horns wrapped in foil-like gold. The notes are haunting, slightly out of tune, as if they're still searching for a memory. And just like that, the room begins to fill, not with people, but with noise, colour, and politics. An envoy from Elam arrives with jars of fermented fruit, hoping to bribe the palace into not invading his cousin's territory. The scribe, half asleep, records the meeting on a clay tablet the size of a paperback novel. You're amazed anyone can write so neatly with a stylus that looks like a Lego sword. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Cuneiform, the writing system used by Sumerians, is one of the oldest known scripts. It was etched into wet clay using a wedge-shaped stylus and used for everything from epic poetry to receipts for goat rental. That's not a joke. There are actual tablets detailing livestock exchanges with more drama than your last group chat. You wander toward the back of the palace where the scent of herbs hangs heavy. This is the healer's space. There are baskets of dry plants, licorice root, henbane, mandrake, and a few pots bubbling over low fires. The physician here is also the priest, which, when you think about it, makes sense. If your treatment fails, you just blame the gods and light another incense stick. Problem solved. A woman with coal-rimmed eyes hands you a drink that smells like licorice and wet grass. You take a sip. It's bitter but oddly calming. She gestures to the reeds around you and explains mostly with her hands that certain stalks were hollowed out and used as straws, especially during fermentation. That's right. Ancient Mesopotamians may have invented the bendy straw. Quirky enough for you. Later, as you trail the perimeter of the palace, you notice a wall of woven reed panels arranged to create airflow. It's cooler here, shady like the inside of a basket. Children nap in corners. Cats doze beside grain sacks. You wonder how anything gets done in this heat. But then again, maybe it's not about getting things done. Maybe it's about surviving gracefully, knowing the walls could dissolve in the next rainstorm. As night returns, you sit beside a low fire made from dried dung and twigs. Smoke curls lazily upward. A servant stirs a pot of barley stew with one hand and fends off mosquitoes with the other. The king has retired early, probably exhausted from all that divine ruling. And here comes another scholarly debate. Some archaeologists believe reed palaces were reserved for ritual or temporary use. Only coronation sites, seasonal gatherings, maybe even funerals. Others argue these structures were lived in year-round, maintained like living beings, repaired constantly, like tuning a harp made of grass. The truth is buried beneath layers of flood silt and the shifting memory of clay. As you recline once more on your surprisingly comfortable reed mat, the wind slips through the walls like a whisper from history. The past doesn't shout in Mesopotamia, it rustles. The next morning begins before the sun even stretches its golden limbs over the horizon. You stir as soft footfalls pass your resting mat, accompanied by the clatter of a wooden ladle in a clay bowl. Someone's up early, preparing breakfast, likely a servant, or more precisely, a member of the palace household, who also happens to be the king's third cousin's daughter-in-law, twice removed. Titles here are tangled like rushes on the riverbank. You rise and follow the aroma of simmering barley and crushed dates to the open-air kitchen. A woman in a linen tunic tends to a fire pit using a paddle to scrape embers from the edge and ladle hot mash into bowls. Her face is streaked with ash, but her smile is easy. She hands you a bowl, and you take a tentative taste. It's surprisingly decent, like oatmeal met raisin pudding and got married during a solar eclipse. Around the courtyard, daily life stirs to its usual rhythm. Laundry flutters between palm posts. Chickens argue over nothing in particular. A young boy wrestles with a stubborn goat. And there, in the centre of it all, is the water carrier. A boy no older than 10, lugging a goatskin bag nearly his own size. Water is life here, and the palace's reed construction may keep things cool, but it doesn't summon rain. This is your first close encounter with Mesopotamia's daily labour, and let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive more than a week. Between the oppressive heat, the lack of indoor plumbing, and the constant risk of stepping in something squishy and unidentified, it's more Survivor Euphrates edition than palace luxury. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Mesopotamia was a deeply stratified society. Kings and priests ruled from the top scribes, and merchants navigated the middle, and farmers and labourers, who made up the vast majority, scraped by with barely enough to eat. Yet, in this precarious pyramid of class, even the king wasn't as secure as you'd think. Rulership was often considered a divine loan, temporary, conditional, and subject to the gods' notoriously erratic Yelp reviews. You trail a priest as he glides past the outer reed walls, heading toward the temple that rises just beyond the palace grounds. It's not reed, not mud brick either, but a ziggurat of proper baked bricks stacked like a mountain of dusty pancakes. The priest climbs steadily, chanting under his breath, his feet bare against sun-warmed stone. You follow quietly, trying not to trip on your borrowed robe. At the top, there's a shrine, a tiny chamber swathed in incense and eerie silence. The air is thick with the scent of burning myrrh and melted resin. The priest leaves an offering of bread and beer on a low altar, and for a moment you wonder if the gods get peckish between prayers. Outside, the city sprawls in every direction, sun-dried huts, canals choked with reeds, animal pens, buzzing with flies. You watch a fisherman toss a net into the Tigris and haul in a boot. No, just a very unfortunate fish. As you descend, you're intercepted by a palace guard, who, after confirming you're neither a spy nor an overly curious god in disguise, offers to show you the bathhouse, or rather, what passes for one. Don't expect marble floors or perfumed fountains. This is more splash and scrub than spa and soak. You enter a reed-walled enclosure with a central pit lined with smooth stones. A woman pours heated water from a jug while her friend rubs clay into her hair. It's not glamorous, but it's functional and fragrant thanks to crushed herbs and sesame oil. She catches you watching and smirks, tossing you a bar of something that smells like garlic and sandalwood. You hope it's soap. It is, probably. Now for your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found evidence of ancient Mesopotamian instructions for making soap using water alkali and cassia oil. They weren't just scrubbing dirt, they were fighting skin infections and making sure their hair didn't resemble sun-scorched straw. Back at the palace, the midday sun has turned the reed walls into faintly glowing honeycomb. Light slants through tiny cracks, painting golden stripes on everything it touches. You curl up beside a sleeping dog, some sort of long-eared hound with opinions, and watch as a servant walks past, carrying a large clay jar labelled "Grain, do not steal." Just then, a group of scribes enter, debating loudly over the correct cuneiform symbol for debt forgiveness. Apparently, even in ancient times, bureaucracy was a full-contact sport. Here comes your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian kings actually lived in reed palaces permanently, or if these were seasonal symbolic structures used during festivals or rituals tied to renewal and nature. Some tablets suggest they spent time in sturdier accommodations, while others describe reed palaces as sites of coronation weddings and royal feasts. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between a blend of ceremony and practicality, mud and myth. Dinner is served just as the sky fades into a smoky pink. You gather with others in a low-ceilinged chamber draped with hanging reeds and dangling amulets. The meal is simple lentils, barley bread, dried figs, and for those with clout, roasted lamb seasoned with garlic and coriander. You chew slowly, lulled by the rhythmic crunch of reed insects serenading the dusk. Someone begins a story. It's about a king who built his palace on a floating bed of reeds and was carried downriver by the gods. You don't understand all the words, but the cadence, the rhythm, it sways like water beneath your bones. As the fire dims and shadows stretch like lazy cats across the courtyard, you retreat once more to your mat. The air is thick with sleep. Somewhere nearby, a baby hiccups. A priest mutters a final blessing. The king dreams of reed thrones and clay stars. And you drift. The rooster doesn't crow in Mesopotamia. At least not in this part of the palace. What does wake you is the rhythmic slap of bare feet on the wet floor outside, followed by the low groan of a wooden door being nudged open and a voice grumbling something about dates again. You stretch under your linen sheet, stiff from the previous day's sweat and river silt, and take a deep breath. It smells of roasted grain, incense, ash, and last night's smoky oil lamp. A cozy cocktail of royal domesticity. It's morning in the palace again, and this time you're shadowing someone very important, the king himself. Yes, the divine, semi-mythical ruler who both communes with the gods and argues with his wife about which reeds to use for roof repair. The Mesopotamian king is already seated on a low cushioned bench, his eyes still half closed as attendants dab a perfumed salve beneath his eyes, possibly crushed pomegranate and fig juice. You sit quietly in the corner, pretending to be a mute cousin. He yawns so deeply that for a moment you glimpse the back of his royal throat, then grunts something that translates roughly to bring the scribes, and not the ones who keep sneezing ink. So begins the king's morning routine. It's not glamorous. There's no parade of elephants or ceremonial bacon, but it's ritualized in the most human way. First comes breakfast barley porridge, sweetened with date syrup, a wedge of goat cheese, and a lukewarm cup of river water filtered through more hope than hygiene. The king eats slowly, chewing with the careful patience of someone who knows half the kingdom is watching. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian kings were considered semi-divine figures, intermediaries between the gods and their people. Their daily lives weren't just about governing, they were about symbolizing. Every bite of food, every prayer, every reed roof over their heads sent a message: I am stability. I am divine favor in a tunic. I am the reason the tigress didn't eat your house this year. After breakfast comes the dream reading. A high priest in flowing linen enters carrying a clay tablet and a bowl of oil. The king describes his dream, something about a giant fish reciting poetry while devouring priests, and the priest nods, solemnly consulting a dream manual that dates back 300 years. Apparently, the fish means trade success, and the poetry suggests a coming lawsuit. You watch as the priest swirls the bowl of oil, gazing into it as if it's a cosmic latte. The interpretation takes a while, mostly because the priest has a flair for dramatics and enjoys long pauses. Eventually, he delivers the verdict: the king must fast for 2 days, avoid fig trees, and be wary of left-handed scribes. Everyone nods. The left-handed scribe in the corner looks nervous. Quirky tidbit time. Mesopotamians genuinely believed dreams were divine messages, and they had entire libraries of dream interpretation tablets. One tablet translates the dream of eating a cooked bird as a sure sign of incoming wealth, unless, of course, the bird was a crow, in which case it foretold a family argument and possibly indigestion. With dreams decoded and fig trees officially side-eyed, the king now begins his correspondence. Scribes crowd around, rolling out damp clay slabs and sharpening their styluses on bits of pottery. One reads aloud a letter from the mayor of a nearby village, who requests additional reeds for his crumbling goat pens. Another tablet comes from a temple accountant who claims that someone has been dipping into the offering jars, probably a goat again. The king mutters decisions between sips of tepid water. You watch his face, wondering how much of this he understands and how much he simply pretends to grasp. Rulership here isn't about micromanagement. It's about posture timing and knowing when to say, let the gods decide. But you do catch a moment of genuine emotion when a scribe reads a letter from the king's cousin, exiled for some offense involving a donkey, and an unfortunate priestess asking for a second chance. The king closes his eyes. He doesn't speak for a long time. When he finally nods, the court moves on, but something lingers behind his eyelids. You realize even ancient rulers had soft spots, especially for donkeys and exiled cousins. Here comes the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian kings genuinely had full control over their courts, or whether high priests and temple bureaucrats pulled the strings behind their reed-woven thrones. While inscriptions and reliefs depict mighty kings conquering lands and smiting foes, day-to-day governance may have been far messier, more about negotiating power between elite families, scribal dynasties, and temple guilds. Think Game of Thrones, but everyone's barefoot, and the Wi-Fi is terrible. As the sun climbs, the palace gets hotter. Reed walls were chosen partly for their cooling properties, but nothing beats the sun when it decides to smite. The king's nap time approaches, and yes, he has an official nap time. Around midday, the palace quiets down. Even the goats stop bickering. A woven mat is laid out in the shaded room just behind the main hall. Palm leaves rustle softly as breeze filters through the reeds. Incense is lit, not just for scent, but also to ward off insects who see kings as just another snack. The king reclines on a thin cushion draped in linen and closes his eyes. A servant fans him lazily with a reed frond while another hums a lullaby that may be older than the concept of lullabies. You too are offered a corner of the room and a scrap of shade. You close your eyes, lulled by the rustle of reeds, the mumble of the city, and the king's steady breathing. It's the most peaceful moment you've had in this marshy kingdom. Just before you drift off, a thought crosses your mind in a world of empires built on mud, where dreams are more important than maps, and fig trees might curse your crops. Maybe the smartest kings were the ones who understood the value of a nap. The king's snores echo gently through the reed chamber, blending with the soft ripple of wind off the riverbanks. You're half asleep yourself when a shadow crosses your face, the dream interpreter again, now carrying a fresh clay tablet and a look of quiet urgency. Nap time is over. The gods, it seems, do not wait for perfect REM cycles. You rub your eyes, stretch like a well-fed goat and rise. Today you're slipping into the world of Mesopotamian dreams, those nighttime messages carved into the consciousness of rulers and peasants alike. It's not just superstition. In this civilization, dreams are a postal system for the divine, and everyone from royal astrologers to goat herders checks their messages every morning. Dreams aren't just private entertainment here, they're public business. If the king dreams of a snake devouring the moon, that's a national emergency. If a farmer dreams of flying over barley fields while singing, his neighbours might ask if he paid his temple dues lately. Dreams are riddles sent by deities, messages meant to be decoded, obeyed, or sometimes politely ignored if they suggest awkward things about the crown prince. You follow the king to the dream hall. Yes, they have a whole chamber for this. It's a dark, cool room, lined with shelves of clay tablets. There's something almost romantic about it. The scent of scorched oil, ancient ink, and crushed herbs hovers like a memory. You notice several scribes in quiet debate. One insists a dream about a donkey with 7 heads is a warning about taxation. Another swears it's about rainfall. The argument is heated, but softly spoken as if the gods themselves might be eavesdropping. Mainstream historical fact time. In ancient Mesopotamia, especially among the Sumerians and Babylonians, dream interpretation was a respected discipline. They compiled extensive dream manuals, tablets, listing hundreds of symbols and their supposed meanings. These were passed down across generations, with interpretations sometimes contradicting each other entirely. For instance, dreaming of bread might mean prosperity in one city, but illness in another, depending on which priest you asked or which god you hoped was watching. Back to our king. He sits before the chief oniromancer. Yes, dream interpreter, but with extra flair, who listens as the king describes the dream he just had during his nap. It involves a golden fish walking upright and reciting poetry in Akkadian. The king looks slightly embarrassed but insists the fish had excellent diction. The priest nods thoughtfully, consulting a cracked tablet. Ah, he says, a golden fish reciting verse. That signals political unrest, but only if the fish was wearing a crown. The king frowns. It might have had a hat. The priest frowns back. We'll need clarification. A scribe is dispatched to sketch possible fish headwear. You sit back and marvel. This is statecraft via surreal bedtime stories. Fringe tidbit time. Some Mesopotamian rulers reportedly went to special dream houses, quiet temples, where they slept on sacred beds in hopes of receiving divine visions. It was like Airbnb, but for prophecy. They'd fast beforehand, avoid garlic, the gods hated bad breath apparently, and sleep under star-shaped canopies, while priests circled humming chants meant to tune their souls to celestial frequencies. Today's dream report leads to action. The priest recommends the king make an offering to Enki, the god of wisdom and water, just in case the poetic fish was trying to warn them about irrigation issues. A clay bowl of beer, a loaf of date bread, and a pinch of powdered obsidian are placed on a reed mat by the riverside, then pushed gently into the water. The fish do not appear poetic or otherwise. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian dreams were truly prophetic or just an elaborate system of social control where interpretations were crafted to justify decisions already made. Did the king truly dream of famine? Or did his advisors need an excuse to stockpile grain and raise taxes? It's a slippery line, like most dreams, and probably like most kings. Later that afternoon, you join the prince, an anxious teen with more eyeliner than experience, for a dream lesson. He sits cross-legged on a woven mat, trying not to look bored while an elder priest reads from a clay tablet. If a man dreams of losing his shoe in the river, it means misfortune, unless the shoe is made of silver, in which case it means marriage. The prince yawns. What if the shoe floats? The priest pauses. Then the man should avoid dairy for 2 weeks. You bite your lip to stifle a laugh. Dream education is serious business. Young nobles learn to recognize symbols in their dreams, record them in dream journals, wet clay, slabs stored in cool rooms, and compare them with historical cases. There's even gossip about a famous general who once dreamed of a weeping tree and delayed battle by a week only to win spectacularly after the rain cleared. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a land where omens outrank weather reports, dreams often hold more sway than strategy. The king's court scribes document all of this. Every dream omen sacrifice and fishy hallucination is filed in the archives stored beneath the palace floor, alongside tax records and grain tallies. You glance at a tablet shelf labelled Nightmares of General Nabu and wonder how many clay pillows he ruined before retirement. As night falls again, the king returns to his chamber. The reed walls glow golden in the lamplight. He lies down, eyes fluttering closed, and murmurs a brief prayer not to a war god or stormbringer, but to the humble dream senders. He asks not for victory, not for riches, but for clarity, for dreams he can understand, for signs that will not embarrass him in front of the fish drawing committee. You curl up in your corner, the cushions scratchy but familiar. The room grows quiet. Outside, frogs chirp, and a breeze rustles the reeds like someone turning a page. You close your eyes, and in that moment, half asleep, half curious, you begin to dream too. The aroma of roasted dates hits you first. It coils in the early dusk air, sweet and smoky, mingling with hints of cumin coriander and the unmistakable yeastiness of barley beer. You rub your eyes. Yes, still in the palace, still walking in sandals, worn soft by sun-baked courtyards. And tonight, you've been invited to dinner. Not just any dinner, mind you, a royal banquet, which in Mesopotamia is equal parts feast spectacle and, oddly enough, bedtime routine. The king, fresh from an afternoon of dreaming about poetic fish, is now in full ceremonial mode. His robes are stitched with gold thread, his beard oiled and crimped into careful curls, and his mood surprisingly mellow. You suspect that dream left him optimistic. Or perhaps it's the drink he's already holding, a thick clay cup of date wine rimmed sticky scent strong enough to curl your eyelashes. You settle onto a cushion, cross-legged beside an elder courtier, with a voice like gravel and a laugh that smells faintly of onions. Around you, servers glide between low tables, balancing trays of boiled goat-honeyed locusts and round flatbreads sprinkled with sesame seeds. And just to your right, there's a bowl of something bright pink. You don't ask. You're here to observe, not question, Mesopotamian culinary choices. Mainstream historical fact time. Mesopotamian banquets, especially royal ones, were important social and religious events. They marked everything from victories in war to seasonal harvest festivals. Archaeological records and translated texts describe feasts with dozens of courses, entertainment from musicians and dancers, and toasts made in the names of multiple gods. Barley-based beer drunk through long straws from communal jars was the beverage of choice, and yes, it was often served thick enough to chew. The music begins soft lyres, bone flutes, and the gentle thump of hand drums. The sound is hypnotic, like your heartbeat slowing underwater. You glance at the king, who's smiling now, fingers tapping lightly against his goblet. Across from him, a delegation from Elam tries politely not to wince as they're served fermented fish paste on bread. One tries to feed it to the dog beneath the table. The dog wisely declines. Then, like a shift in tide, the meal turns sacred. A priest rises and recites a chant to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. The room falls silent except for one hiccuping diplomat who is promptly glared into submission. A ceramic bowl is passed around filled with warm beer mixed with herbs. Everyone drinks. This is no mere toast. It's a blessing, a lullaby in liquid form, a way to slow the mind, soften the belly, and prepare the soul for sleep. Fringe, tidbit time. Some Mesopotamian bedtime rituals included aromatics like myrrh, frankincense, or tamarisk wood, burned in clay pots beside the sleeping mat. There are references in old texts to dream oils being rubbed on temples, and even sleep stones, smooth pebbles, warmed and placed beside the head to encourage peaceful slumber. Did they work? Who knows? But they looked very aesthetic. You lean back now, full of goat and grapes, eyelids heavy. The banquet shifts into its next phase, storytelling. A bard steps forward, his voice reedy but practiced. He tells of a king who defeated famine by tricking the gods into eating burnt onions. Laughter bubbles up around the room. Then another tale, this one darker, a dream of a city, swallowed by the river and a fisherman who walked through walls. Historians still argue whether these bedtime tales were based on actual omens, or if they were moral lessons passed down in palatable form. Either way, they served their purpose: soothe the powerful, educate the young, and give the full-bellied something pleasant to mull over while drifting into sleep. And speaking of drifting, things begin to wind down. Torches dim. Servants snuff the oil lamps one by one. You are led gently like a half-snoozing toddler to a corner of the palace reserved for overnight guests. It's not a bedroom in the modern sense. More of a partitioned nook filled with layered reed mats, a low bench, and a vessel of cool water perfumed with mint. There's no door, just woven drapery. And through that curtain you hear the soft hum of lullabies, not sung to children, but to adults. This is Mesopotamia, where even grown men are rocked to sleep by lullaby and lyre. The harpists sing in Sumerian voice, rising and falling like tide over tide. Lay down the head that wore the crown, rest. Now, while stars drift down, dream not of war, nor coin, nor sky, but the garden of reeds, where gods walk by. You blink slowly. The music and warmth wrap around you like a weighted blanket. Someone passes by, placing a small clay charm by your pillow shaped like a fish. You smile. The king must have requested it, just in case the dreams return. Outside, frogs begin their nightly chorus. Inside, the last torch flickers out. And for a while, there is only the hush of breathing, the rustle of linen, and the steady beat of drums, fainter now, like a heart 2 rooms away. You feel it in your chest, and you sleep. You awaken not with a jolt, but with that kind of foggy softness where you're not sure if it's dawn or just your eyelids being ambitious. There's no rooster, no temple bell, no dramatic sunrise, just the faint smell of smoke from last night's reed torches and the even fainter sound of sweeping. Somewhere, someone is brushing sand off stone floors with a broom made of date palm fronds. The empire never truly sleeps, it only whispers. You sit up on your mat and stretch joints popping like ancient pottery underfoot. The fish charm has fallen to the ground. You pick it up and tuck it into your sash because why not, right? A little luck never hurts in a land where dreams are law and gods change moods like river channels. Today you're shadowing a palace architect. Yes, your itinerary is weirdly flexible, and no, you weren't given a reason. But that's Mesopotamia for you. 1 minute, you're at a royal feast. The next, you're following a man who carries a stick and keeps saying load-bearing in Akkadian like it's a warning. He leads you out to the edge of the palace complex, where the reed structures give way to mud brick to be precise. Stacked sun-dried and often lined with bitumen that smells like boiled tar and old arguments. You step gingerly over a partially buried lintel and into what looks like a half-finished corridor. Mainstream historical fact time. While stone structures existed in Mesopotamia, the bulk of construction, especially in the southern regions like Sumer, relied on mud brick and reeds due to limited access to stone quarries. Even palaces and temples were often built from these humble materials, making them susceptible to erosion floods and occasional crumbling in the middle of ceremonies. The famous ziggurats, also mostly mud brick under all that glamour. Your architect friend waves his arm dramatically, indicating the long central hall. This, he mutters, is where the king's dreams come to walk. Poetic, right? But it's also literal. One of the stranger duties of the Mesopotamian palace designer was aligning chambers and hallways based on divination and star maps. Historians still argue whether this was purely symbolic or if there were practical purposes like airflow or light optimization hidden in all that cosmic alignment. And you feel it too. There's a strange sense of order here. The walls don't just rise, they lean inward at precise angles. The ceiling, still incomplete, is sketched in with reed mats. The air is cooler here, almost comforting. You realize this isn't just where the king dreams. This is a house built to hold dreams. You step into what appears to be a royal sleeping chamber in progress. It's larger than most huts in the city, with grooves in the floor where wooden partitions will rest. A servant walks in carrying a tray of what looks like perfumed clay. For the cooling trough, she explains. So the room can breathe. Right. Because breathing rooms are totally normal. Fringe, tidbit time. Ancient Mesopotamian architects sometimes embedded charms or offerings into the foundations of buildings. Tiny figurines, inscriptions, and occasionally entire miniature shrines have been found beneath floors or inside walls, intended to ward off misfortune, restless spirits, or building collapses, which frankly were all somewhat interchangeable back then. You crouch and examine one such offering, a carved bull's head, no bigger than your thumb, probably placed there by a builder who muttered something like, "Hope this holds," before slapping a mud brick on top. You feel a strange reverence for this anonymous worker. After all, kings get poems, but the guy who mixed the mortar gets buried in it metaphorically and literally. Suddenly you hear laughter. Children. You peek outside and find the royal courtyard now alive with morning rituals. Young scribes practicing cuneiform on damp clay tablets. Musicians tuning lyres that look more like abstract sculptures than instruments. A priest waving incense over a turtle with solemn purpose. The architect beside you chuckles. That's the dream cleansing ceremony, he explains. If the king has a nightmare, we burn sage over a turtle and ask it to carry the bad dream away. You blink. Seriously, he shrugs. Not my idea. And yes, that's your quirky turtle moment for the day. Now the king himself arrives not in a chariot or on a palanquin, but walking barefoot, robe pulled tight against the early chill. He looks ordinary, almost sleepy. He pats a child on the head, stops to examine a wall fresco of himself slaying a lion, then enters the half-built chamber and pauses. He touches the reed frame gently. Then he says, "This one will be quieter. The reeds will rustle just enough to hide my thoughts." You realize in this world, sound insulation is sacred. The rustling of reeds is not a defect, it's the lullaby of the empire. Later, you're shown the process of reed selection. Not just any plant will do. They must be flexible, strong, harvested during the correct lunar phase. And if you listen to the older builders, picked while singing a particular hymn, you try to hum along as one man slices a thick reed with a knife shaped like a fish. He grins at you. If it bends and sings, the king will sleep. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a genuine understanding of acoustics and airflow. Some even suggest the rhythmic sway of reed walls helped induce dream states. You walk the perimeter once more as the day warms. Shadows shorten. The air hums with bees and hammers. And as you glance up at the unfinished roof, you see birds nesting in the beams, sparrows mostly, small common ignored, but not here. One builder gently shoos them aside. "Let them finish," he whispers. "They keep away the night spirits." You nod, suddenly aware that in a palace of mud and reeds, even sparrows are part of the architecture. And again, it's quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means silence. The kind of quiet that means harmony. Like every sound is where it's supposed to be. And maybe, just maybe, you've started dreaming with your eyes open. Your footsteps crunch lightly against the packed earth as you wander past a low wall, etched with shallow cuneiform. You're still within the palace compound, but this part is quieter, less majestic, more practical. The kind of space where actual living happens, not just ceremony. Today you're heading toward the reed granary, not the flashiest destination, true, but then again, neither is a bedroom made of sticks. And look how that turned out. A reed granary sounds like it should be flimsy, maybe even laughable. But as you walk closer, you realize just how smart it is. It's elevated slightly above ground, held aloft by smooth mud brick columns, and undergirded with woven reed mats tightly bound with date palm fibre. A few goats lounge in its shade, clearly unbothered by the great imperial grain economy overhead. Inside, the air is shockingly cool, cooler than outside, cooler than your own house back in your century. Why? Because of how the wind threads through the narrow slats of the reed walls, just enough airflow to wick moisture, not enough to stir the grains. Natural climate control, Mesopotamian style. Mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamians used reed structures not only for housing, but also for storage facilities like granaries and cooling rooms. The permeability of the material allowed for passive ventilation, which kept food fresher longer, especially important when you're a king hoarding grain to secure your dynasty or simply survive the next seasonal flood. You run your fingers along a bundle of barley. Each stalk is dried to a precise crispness. You're not sure who decides what that crispness is, but you're confident there's a priest somewhere who swears the gods gave him exact barley specks during a dream. Outside, a group of young scribes practice tallying the grain in clay tablets, making neat, wedge-shaped impressions that look like a cross between a spreadsheet and a stubborn toddler's attempt at modern art. And then the chief grainkeeper, an older woman with a strong back and stronger side-eye, beckons you over. "You'll help carry," she says, handing you a woven basket. There's no room to argue. Fringe tidbit royal palaces often employed women in roles of authority over granaries and storage. Archaeological records include tablets signed by female administrators, suggesting a more complex and possibly more egalitarian workforce in palace logistics than often assumed. As you hoist the surprisingly heavy basket onto your back, you pass through a narrow hall between the storage area and a small reed-shaded courtyard. A cat darts between your feet, its green eyes glowing in the morning light. It doesn't meow, it just stares at you, like it knows where your secrets are buried. "Don't step on the cat," the woman mutters. "They're lucky for the silos." You almost drop the basket, but you manage. Around the courtyard, workers sit, weaving fresh reed panels for maintenance. The conversation is hushed but casual. One man tells a joke about a bricklayer, a priest, and a dancing goat. You don't fully understand it, but you laugh anyway. The rhythm of it is soothing, like the repetition of weaving itself. Now the palace steward enters a man with meticulously shaped eyebrows and sandals far too clean for someone in logistics. He claps his hands and calls for attention. Today he announces the king's dream was particularly vivid. A river divided in two, he said. One branch carried grain, the other carried snakes, which naturally means a new chamber must be built to honor Enki, god of water and wisdom. You blink. That escalated quickly, you mutter. The old woman hands you another basket. Historians still argue whether dream recording in royal courts functioned as genuine prophecy interpretation or subtle political theatre. Did the kings truly believe the gods whispered zoning plans into their dreams? Or did architects just play along to get the new storeroom budget approved? Back at the new build site, you're now surrounded by clay bitumen and, of course, more reeds. The builders are singing a work chant that's part prayer, part complaint. One section of the wall has collapsed slightly, and they're trying to relay the bricks without drawing the attention of the royal inspector. Someone pulls you aside to explain how the roof will be assembled. The king has requested a softer echo, which apparently involves weaving different thicknesses of reeds into a suspended layer above the ceiling. Like acoustic tiles, but biodegradable. You nod slowly, pretending you know what you're doing. The man demonstrates by shaking two reed panels. One rattles like a snare drum. The other hums like distant rain. He hands you the latter and says, "This one feels like sleep." He's right, it does. Lunch comes in the form of flatbread with date syrup and roasted fish wrapped in leaves. You sit under a shaded awning, watching a scribe tell fortunes with turtle shells and oil drops. The king's chief dream interpreter walks by, squints at your forehead and mutters, "You've got a storm in your fifth star." You nod politely. You assume that's good. In the afternoon, you're invited, well conscripted, into helping the royal mat weavers construct a new sleeping mat for the upcoming ritual slumber. The king must sleep on a mat that hasn't touched sadness, one of them says. You have no idea how sadness is measured in reeds, but you're not about to argue with someone holding a ceremonial knife. As you help braid the final strand, one woman begins humming. The tune is unfamiliar but mesmerizing, like a lullaby, layered with echoes. You find yourself moving in rhythm hands, tracing patterns you didn't know you could make. It feels ancient, intuitive, like your body remembers what your mind never learned. Quirky moment, according to certain translated texts, royal mats were sometimes woven with tiny tufts of animal hair, or thread dyed with rare herbs. believed to enhance dreams or protect the sleeper from dream spirits known as etamu, which sounds suspiciously like your grumpy neighbor's name. The mat is finished by sunset. It's beautiful, not ornate, but beautiful in a way that feels honest. Like something made not for ceremony, but for comfort. You want to lie on it. You want to sleep and forget the 21st century ever happened. And maybe in this place you do. The king arrives later than expected, his robe dusted with fine sand. He steps onto the mat and pauses, eyes closed, lips murmuring something that might be prayer or simply thanks. He lies down without fanfare, curling onto his side like a child. The rustling reeds above him sway ever so slightly. You back away slowly, footsteps silent on the clay floor. Outside, the sky has turned ink blue. The torches are lit. The cats are curled. The snakes, if they ever existed, are dreaming elsewhere. And the palace sleeps. You wake early the next morning, or rather, you're never quite sure if you slept. Something about the way the reed walls filtered the breeze, and the faint whisper of bullfrogs beyond the irrigation ditches made it impossible to tell where your dreams ended and the sounds of dawn began. Outside the palace, you hear the morning chants drifting from the temple steps, melodic, repetitive, almost hypnotic. You step into your sandals and move toward the courtyard where breakfast is being handed out in large ceramic bowls. Barley porridge again. No cinnamon this time, but there's a single dried fig sitting on top like a fancy garnish. You take it as a win. Today is no ordinary palace day. It's a Zagmuk festival, New Year Babylonian style. This means the king will symbolically die and be reborn, because what's a royal celebration without a bit of dramatic flair and existential crisis? You're roped into helping prepare the ceremonial reed bed, not the regular one. Mind you, but a special version that must be tied at 11 precise joints and anointed with oil that smells suspiciously like overripe cucumbers. Mainstream historical fact: during the Zagmuk festival, the Mesopotamian king underwent ritual humiliation and was temporarily stripped of his power. This included public beatings, light ceremonial ones, meant to humble the ruler before he reaffirmed his connection with the gods, especially Marduk. You glance at the makeshift reed throne set up in the main hall. It creaks under the weight of a dozen flower garlands. Several priests are debating the correct arrangement of date branches for maximum cosmic resonance, which, as far as you can tell, means they want them to look aesthetically pleasing from the ziggurat balcony. You find yourself drifting into the hall's side chamber, a cool, shaded alcove, where the old court astronomer is drawing sky patterns on a wet clay tablet. He squints at the horizon, then back at his chart. The stars are restless, he mutters, but the reeds remain calm. That's good or bad. Depends who you ask. Fringe tidbit. Ancient Mesopotamian astronomers often incorporated omens drawn from reed patterns in river currents. If reeds bent a certain way during sunrise, it was believed to signal either fortune or doom, depending on the accompanying bird calls. Basically, it was weather forecasting meets improv theatre. Back at the royal courtyard, the reed workers are adding final touches to a new sleeping platform, the king's rebirth cot. It's twice the size of a normal bed, and lined with lamb's wool and layered reeds. You ask why it needs to be so large. The king dreams wide, one worker says cryptically. Soon, musicians arrive. Lyres, drums, a haunting reed flute that might be the earliest ancestor of your cousin's forgotten high school clarinet. The rhythm is slow and solemn, a lullaby meant for the cosmos itself. The air smells like burning myrrh and fresh mud. As the ceremony begins, the king appears wearing only a simple linen tunic. No gold, no weapon, not even sandals. He lies on the reed mat with his arms at his side as the priest begins reciting the Enuma Elish, an epic so old it makes Shakespeare look like a startup poet. Historians still argue whether the ritual death and rebirth was taken literally by the audience, or if it was more symbolic theatre performed to reassure the public that the cosmic order still held. Some even suggest the king may have been replaced by a stand-in during particularly tense years, because nothing says stability like a royal understudy. As the king rests, you find yourself leaning against a pillar, eyes half closed. The reed walls ripple slightly as the afternoon wind shifts direction. A hush falls over the crowd. The priest's chant slows. You realize with a faint startle that you're swaying in time with the ceremony, almost like you're part of the reed mat itself. It's a strange thing, watching a king sleep. Stranger still, to realize that everything around him, the palace, the rituals, the structure of his dreams rests on plants that grow wild in swampy soil. Kings may fall, stars may shift, but the reeds are eternal. You're handed a small token, a charm woven from split reed and painted with ochre. For protection during sleep, says the woman who gives it to you. You slip it into your satchel, wondering briefly if TSA would let it through. The ceremony ends with a slow, clapping rhythm like the heartbeat of the city. The king sits up reborn and dons his crown anew. The crowd cheers, but gently, like they're afraid to wake something. That night, a feast is held. You're given a place near the palace courtyard, your reed mat tucked beneath a fig tree. There's honeyed bread, roasted onions, and even fermented date beer, which tastes like soda's ancient cousin, who never quite figured out carbonation. The stars emerge slowly like careful scribes, etching across the blackboard of the heavens. You lie back on your mat, listening to the hush of wind through the reeds, and something inside you relaxes, not in your muscles, but in the quietest part of your thinking. Maybe it's the rhythm of the day. Maybe it's the song of the river nearby. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the realization that for all the king's power, for all the epic chants and omens and ceremonies, he sleeps on reeds too. And if that's enough for him, maybe tonight it's enough for you. You wake before dawns again, not because of any royal obligation or temple bell, but because the scent of wet silt and roasted chickpeas drifts through the reed slats and tugs you back into consciousness. The palace feels quieter today. The Zagmuk festival has ended. The king has been reborn. The priests have exhaled, and even the river seems to glide more gently past the city's outer wall. But something in the air is shifting. You hear the soft splash of someone washing clothes near the canal. A woman hums an old lullaby, one about a boy who carved his home out of driftwood and reed, only to discover the gods had lived there first. You wonder if it's a love song or a warning. You head for the storerooms behind the eastern wall. That's where the scribes keep the archives, hundreds of clay tablets stacked in orderly confusion. It smells of dust and patience. There you find records, whole epics, carved in cuneiform about palace expansions, flood schedules, and shipments of date syrup. But tucked in a cracked shelf is a strange one, a log describing a palace of floating dreams. It details a structure made entirely of bundled reeds, lashed to wooden beams, and anchored to the edge of the Euphrates. Floating palaces, part raft, part throne room, built for kings who wish to sleep upon water. Mainstream historical fact, the ancient city of reportedly had ceremonial reed boats used not only for transport, but as temporary palaces for river festivals. Some kings believed that proximity to water during dreams amplified divine messages. You run your fingers along the tablet, imagining the reed mat swaying beneath you, the slow lap of river currents replacing the wind's lullaby. Later that morning, you follow an elder into the floodplain beyond the city wall. The soil here is thick, dark, and rich enough to grow anything, even dreams you suspect. He stops by a mound covered in rivergrass and leans on his staff. This was it, he says. The last reed palace. Sank during the spring flood. Oh, must have been 100 years ago, maybe more. Some say the king didn't leave. Said he liked the silence too much. You stare at the overgrown earth. There's no visible ruin, no toppled columns, no cracked mosaics. Just reeds. Tall, still swaying gently like they're guarding something ancient and soft beneath the mud. Fringe, tidbit, a few unearthed reed mats from Mesopotamian sites contained faint traces of lavender oil and crushed myrtle, possible evidence of early sleep rituals or simple efforts to combat river stench. Scholars aren't sure which, but either way, it's peak luxury for a plant-based mattress. You kneel and touch the soil. It's damp but firm. A memory of structure clings to it, the faint impression of walls that once shifted with every gust of wind. As the sun climbs higher, the reeds shimmer in waves. You lie back once more on a mat, woven fresh by the elder's granddaughter. It's simple, but comforting. You imagine what it must have felt like to rule the world from such humble foundations. Historians still argue whether reed palaces were status symbols of cultural identity or merely functional responses to a soggy climate. Either way, the fact remains, entire empires were dreamed into being on these beds of bundled grass. You drift slowly. The sounds fade, the flutes, the chants, the market voices, even the water. It all slips behind you like a slow-moving current, one you don't need to resist. And now we begin to slow things down even further. The stars are high now, scattered like tiny cuneiform pressed across the velvet sky. The wind has softened, and the reeds around you whisper instead of rustle. The city of kings is still, its breath shallow, its heart lulled into peace. You lie curled on your reed mat, the scent of the river and the earth gently surrounding you. It's cool against your skin. You shift slightly, not to get comfortable, but to settle just right like a reed in the current, swaying, not sinking. Somewhere a frog calls once, then falls silent. You imagine the floating palace again, not as ruin, but as memory. Not lost, but sleeping, like you. There's no need to think anymore. No need to count time or worry where you are in the story. You're exactly where you need to be between past and present, reed and water, dream and stillness. Let your breath slow. Let the silence carry you. The king sleeps. The palace rests. And so do you.